Hi, I'm Alex Pault, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Talking Timepieces, where we talk about watch collecting and horology. Today, we're going to talk about GMT watches and the different kinds of GMT watches and how they work. Let's take a look at the Navitimer GMT. We've got the Omega Seamaster GMT. Might as well talk about world timers. Got the Frederic Constant world timer and the Mont Blanc Geosphere. What the heck, we'll even toss in the Sorna, although it's not really a world timer, it plays really well at it. So let's turn the camera around and take a look at these fun watches. Let's talk GMT watches. Before I get started, a quick wristwatch check. I'm wearing the Omega Speed Sonic, a really cool variation on the Speedmaster with the Accutron-based movement in it, tuning fork. There's a video on this watch in the show archive. Now, before we get started and talk about what a GMT watch means, let's explain what the term GMT means. GMT is the literally Greenwich Mean Time. And Greenwich, England, is where the imaginary line where all time starts begins. And the reason for that is since the British were the first to create accurate chronometers, and a chronometer is an accurate watch. A chronograph is a watch with a stopwatch movement. They are two different things. Although most chronographs are chronometers, but not all. And, well, obviously, not all chronometers are chronographs. Now, the GMT function, however, because the British established navigation and time for the planet, it's all based on Greenwich Mean Time, which is where their observatory was, and that's where the arbitrary line that starts everything begins, as I said. And you could tell on this watch, for example, this is the Breitling Navitimer GMT. See if I can get a little closer. Okay. And you could tell that it's the GMT because it has a extra red hand that is pointing to a 24-hour time. You see the outer edge right inside of the rehaut goes 24 hours. And this points to then that second time zone. So a GMT watch essentially is a watch that can display more than one time. Usually two, and sometimes three. In this case, it displays only one time zone, and it displays it in 24-hour fashion. Some watches display time in a 12-hour fashion, and we'll get to one of those in this video. And some, the ones that show 12 hours usually have some other indicator to show day-night, either where you don't need day-night where you are, so you'd be using the day-night for the place that you're trying to track the time of. Now, most people keep their GMT watches with both hands set to the local time, and then that way when they travel, they can turn the watch, the second hand, I shouldn't say the second hand, but the primary hour hand, not the secondary hour hand, can put the primary hour hand, sorry about that, you can put the primary hour hand on the time that you set. One of the nice aspects of a GMT watch is that it allows you to track two time zones. Now, in the case of the Breitling Navitimer, as I was saying, it tracks all the way around 24 hours, and then it allows you then to set the primary hour hand to wherever the local time is, and then the GMT hand will keep track of your original home time. So you've got then the time you were and the time you are. Now, this is going to emphasize one of the major differences between types of GPS GPS is satellite navigation. One of the ways the biggest differences between the types of GMT watches is how the hour hand is managed, both hour hands. So for example, in the case of this Breitling Navitimer GMT, this is based on the Value 7750, and they've just added some functionality to it. In this case, a 24-hour hand slaved off of the main movement. And then if you pull it out to the first notch, you can adjust the date in one direction, and you can adjust the GMT hand in the other. But if you notice, only in those directions. Like, let me zoom in a little more, and you see, so the date advances in one direction, and the GMT hand advances in the other. And so what that means is that when you get to wherever you're going, you have to basically rejigger all of the hands. So he says you see the GMT tracks the primary hour hand and is independently adjustable, but is not independent of the movement. So in other words, I can't simply roll the GMT hand back and forth as I see fit. I have to roll the GMT hand forward to the time I need and then adjust the date to get me back on track for the date. So I can track 2 time zones with this watch, but this is a GMT in the lightest sense of the word. You can track a second time zone, but it is not easy and it is not intuitive. Once you get to know the watch, it becomes easy because it's not a difficult maneuver, but it's not something that you immediately assume that I pull it out to the first stop and date in one direction, time in the other. It's just a good application of a GMT time in the venerable Value 7750 configuration. Now, here's an example of a watch that has a true GMT function. And when I say true GMT function, that means that you can track separate time zones independently, easily. And what that means is that you can adjust the hour hand independently of the GMT hand and vice versa. Now, in this case, what that means is this has actually sacrificed the ability to easily change the date. In order to change the date, you've literally got to scroll through the days. But since it is a single GMT hand, you can literally scroll through it using the GMT hand. So let's take a look at how this one operates. So we unscrew the crown because this, of course, is a diver. This is the Omega Seamaster GMT, and this was one of the earlier models. Let's just show you very quickly. Zoom back out a bit. This was one of the first generation that had the coaxial movement. So this has got the ETA modified coaxial movement, and first generation coaxial Omega watches. Very nice piece, and so they put a display back on it, which is unusual for a Omega of this vintage. But essentially, this is a quote-unquote true GMT in that the hands are truly completely independent. So let's unscrew, wipe fingerprints off glass, crystal. And so you pull this out to the first mark, you notice it does not hack the mechanism, and I can independently scroll the hour hand around. See, so this is a true GMT in that I can set both times, right? And then when I get to my destination and the captain says your XYZ time, I set the hour without hacking the mechanism, and then the red hand points to my local time. Now, the red hand also, of course, tracks with the hour hand, but that makes pretty much sense there. So this is a true GMT in that, like I said, the hands are completely independent. I mean, the hour hand is completely independent of the mechanism and can be adjusted on the fly. Now, in the case of, say, for example, an Explorer 2, which has the same basic functionality, it's got its 24-hour dial on the outer bezel. And in the case of the GMT, which is essentially the exact same watch, the GMT Master has got a rotating bezel, so you can track then 3 time zones. So a watch like this, the Omega Seamaster GMT or the Rolex Explorer 2, has got true 2 time zone capability. And then if this had a 24-hour bezel, this would have then the additional ability to track a 3rd time zone, a la the GMT Master. But that's not that important for me. 2 time zones is enough. If I wanted to track more than 2 time zones, I would go to a piece like this Mont Blanc Geosphere. Now, the Mont Blanc Geosphere is a perfect example of a watch that has a 12-hour hand for the second time zone. And then in this case, it uses these beautiful globes for day-night indication so that you can actually see day-night on the entire planet with this watch. You see? And if you had really good eyesight, it's also a world timer since it gives you the hours as well. So I've got my second time zone here, primary hand, and of course, day-night indication for the entire planet. And this is also a jumping hour hand GMT. So this is also a true GMT in the sense that the hour hand is independent of the movement. All right, and again, in the case of this, you can change the date with brute force methods. Although the Mont Blanc has an additional feature, it's got a secondary pusher here, hidden pusher, so I can adjust the time zone without worrying. I'm not going to push it because I'm going to have to reset the whole dang thing. But essentially, this pusher, this hidden pusher, controls this GMT hand, which also tracks to the movement. So I can set this GMT hand either by having it follow the regular hour, or I can adjust it on the fly with that little pusher. Now, some luxury GMT watches have a visible external pusher because that's how they expect you to switch the times. Some GMT watches don't use a 12-hour hand for that second time. They use, say, for example, a number wheel to show that second time. But essentially, it's just showing a second time with day-night indication because it's a 12-hour dial. And in this case, since it's also got globes that are tracking true time, and in that case, let me show you that part. Zoom in a little bit. As you see, the globes do track. So you get true 24-hour time, you get day-night indication, and you get an awesome display of time functionality. Mont Blanc really hit it out of the park with this watch, in my opinion. And there is a video on this watch in the archive. Now, World Timer, before I show you the last watch, I will show you this kind of intermediate fun thing. And this is the Sorna. Now, the Sorna, there was a company that made some interesting pieces back in the 70s, and this is one of them. This isn't really a world timer. It's not really a chronograph, but with very intelligent dial design, they managed to get away with it. So, for example, it has a city wheel, so you could do your world time calculations on the fly by just simply adjusting the wheel whenever you needed to know what the time was. It also has a little timing dial as well, timing ring as well that can be controlled. And then these pushers just control the date. So it's not a chronograph, not a world timer. It's just a clock with a very, very intelligent dial design. So now, let's look at a real world timer. In fact, what I think one of the most cost-effective world timers on the planet, definitely the best you can get for less than 10K. And that's the Frédéric Constant, who've made a great name for themselves. They're getting beaten up in the aftermarket because they were a young company trying to get off the ground for a long time. And so they got a lot of pieces that came in and out, and they've discontinued. So there are a lot of inexpensive Frédéric Constants out there for the gray market to eat. But essentially, of all of them, I would make the argument that this is the best of theirs because they make a perpetual calendar that is also very nice, but I think they weren't very good with the hidden pushers on it. This is a perfect example of a fantastic design, in-house movement, and fully functional world timer. Now, by that, if you notice, it's got a time wheel that runs under the date wheel, under the city wheel. So it tells you the time in every city around the planet, not just two places like a GMT. This is a true world time watch, which is then not considered a GMT because it literally gives you the time in real time around the planet. And the nice thing about, let's pull this out a little bit. the nice thing about the Frédéric Constant is that it really is an elegant GMT watch. Here, let me adjust it a little bit there. Okay, it really is an elegant GMT watch in that you see the time flows. You don't have to worry about setting them independently, right? Because it tells you constant time. All you have to do is adjust the time properly. And then if you pull it out to the first notch, you can adjust the date wheel and the date. I mean, the city wheel and the date. You see, so it gives you complete control over the time and date. And because it's telling you the time around the world continuously, you don't have to worry about setting a second time zone. So, yeah, that's a world timer, different from a GMT with world time, different from a GMT with no time, different from a GMT with flying hours. So there are a lot of different ways to have a GMT iteration. And then, of course, world timers are a completely different ball of wax, but I figured I would include them because a lot of people conflate the two. So that was GMT Watches. If you liked it, please subscribe. Let's turn the camera around and close out the episode. So that was GMT and world time watches. I hope it was interesting. If you have any questions, please leave a question in the comments, and I'll be more than happy to answer. And please subscribe. It really helps. Thanks for taking the time to be with me. I really appreciate it.